Welcome to Sold with Webinars, a podcast that aims to uncover how the most successful experts, coaches, consultants, and e-course professionals sell their products and services with just one sales presentation or webinar. A simple sales webinar can transform the business and life of a solopreneur. And this podcast will show you how other experts just like you are generating 6 and 7 figures per year online with their webinars. So let's get started. Hey, it's Joel Irway, and welcome to another episode of Sold with Webinars. Today, you are going to want to pay attention to this episode if you're one of the types of people who knows you should be using webinars, but you're afraid of being salesy, you're afraid of really presenting an offer, you're uncomfortable with sales. Because today we spoke with my good friend, John Corcoran, and on our episode today, John was taking a really different approach with webinars and attacking a couple of markets that most people aren't really attacking. And we discussed how we can use webinars to provide immense value to other people's audiences, and in exchange, only get certain things from them, only get their email addresses. We don't even make a hard pitch at the end. Now, it's really important to pay attention to this episode because John just actually had his largest partner webinar to date with, a couple thousand registrants, and he absolutely crushed it. And so he talked about a couple of things that are really important for you. Number one, how he transitions to his close when he doesn't want to sound salesy. And he also talked about this approach that he's doing to get in front of massive audiences and provide immense value. So you're going to love this episode, and let's get right to it. John, welcome to the show, man.
Joel, thanks for having me.
I'm super excited to talk about this. So we just had our own little mini 5-minute powwow before we got onto this podcast. So you got me really excited about this topic because as soon as we saw it, we said, Joel, this is the absolute best time to hop on this podcast because I just had my largest webinar to date. So before we jump into that, I want to give a quick little tease there. Go ahead and let my audience know, who is John Corcoran? What's your businesses? What do you do? How have you gotten to this point? And let's just warm them up a little bit.
And I also want to just have a little splash of cold water on our face and a little dose of reality that, it takes a long time to get to that point. So I'm sure we'll get into that. But who am I? I jokingly refer to myself as a recovering attorney. I have worked in a number of different careers. I'm most noted for having been a writer in the Clinton Whitehouse. I was a speechwriter to a governor of California. I was an early employee of DreamWorks. I've been a practicing attorney for about 10 years, run my own boutique law firm in Silicon Valley in the San Francisco Bay Area. And, now, kind of transitioned out of trading hours for dollars and built my audience online, which built Smart Business Revolution with my blog and podcast, and then teamed up with a great guy named Dr. Jeremy Weisz, and we started Rise 25. And now what we focus on is helping professional services entrepreneurs who are sick of trading hours for dollars like we were. He's a chiropractor, I'm a lawyer, and want to get into doing something that's more scalable and more of a one-to-many fashion. And so we help them to do that, and webinars are a key piece of that.
Awesome. Cool. So you've been doing this since, what was it, 2014, correct?
Depends on when you count me starting, I guess. Okay. I mean, I started a blog, the present version of a blog around probably 2008. I blogged about legal topics for a long time because I was a lawyer. I thought maybe I'll get legal clients this way. I realized that was boring as crap and no one wants to read. People just pass on through. They read something and they keep going. So then I pivoted from that to writing about entrepreneurship, and that again was too broad. And then I pivoted from that to writing about relationship building. So 2008, I guess maybe is when you'd say. And then it was a very slow transition. It wasn't until probably about 2015 that I really started stepping back from practicing law and was able to actually drive income from non-legal activities and spend more of my time on building something that was more scalable.
Awesome. Very cool. Very cool. So your primary focus is what? Is it Rise 25 or is it something else?
Yeah. Now my primary focus is Rise 25. Yeah, that's what we've been focusing on. And we put on live retreats for professional services entrepreneurs, about 4 a year throughout the country. At different luxury hotels and resorts, and we bring people together, and it's all about helping people to shift from trading hours for dollars and focus more on creating a business that's more scalable and that's more one-to-many fashion, leveraging the different digital tools that we have today. So that's what we focus on.
Great, man. So today we are going to talk all about using webinars as a list building strategy. And so we teased our audience a little bit earlier on and talked about how you just had your largest joint venture webinar to date or partner webinar to date for lead generation. Talk about this model a little bit before we talk about what you did. Was it yesterday when you had that webinar?
It was two days ago now.
2 days
yeah.
ago. Okay.
Yeah. And I should say that, I started with webinars for the first time in early 2012, I think, maybe 2011, using instant teleseminar. And like a lot of people, I just, started promoting it on like LinkedIn and Twitter, and I got hardly anyone to register. I tried it a couple of times, didn't work too well, didn't build my list or anything. So I basically gave up for about 2.5 years and didn't do it at all. And I tried a bunch of other things. So during 2014, for example, I was guest posting a lot. I was writing for everything from small little blogs, worked my way up to like Forbes and Entrepreneur and Huffington Post, and went from about 1,000 email subscribers, because my goal is to grow my list, 1,000 email subscribers at the beginning of 2014 to about 5,800 at the end of 2014. And I thought, great, this worked really well, 6-fold increase. I'll just keep on doing this. And then first part of 2015, I learned from some other people about, okay, not doing internal webinars, but doing external webinars for other audiences. Anyone who has an audience that is relevant to what you want to talk about, the type of audience that you want to build. And so I started doing that. And during the first quarter of 2015, I doubled my list from 6,000 to 12,000. So I said, well, forget guest posting. That's too much work. I got to write all this stuff. It's unique every time, and forget this. So I basically completely abandoned doing that and totally doubled down on doing webinars. Did about 80 webinars. I think it was 83 webinars during 2015. Grew my list up to about, I think, 25,000 or something like that during 2015, and haven't looked back since then. Just get completely focused on webinars as a list growth strategy.
I want to get clear for everyone who's listening right now, because we also had a previous podcast where somebody was using webinars. They were growing their business strictly from JV. So they're making a pitch at the end, and you don't necessarily do that. Your primary focus is lead gen only, correct?
I do both. So, if I'm doing a joint venture webinar for someone who is cool with me making a pitch at the end, then I will. This one that I was just talking about, it was for SCORE Association. It's a national nonprofit. One of their requirements was that their presenters don't make a pitch at the end. And, we can talk about this. I've had a number of different times where I've done webinars for companies. It's usually a company or a nonprofit or something that doesn't want you to do a pitch at the end. And there are ways you can get around that. And I only recommend doing it if the audience is large enough, because it's still worth it. I mean, you're still going to get, assuming you can, and this is another topic we can talk about, assuming you can get them onto your email list, then it's going to be worth it for the long-term nurturing. You can nurture them, and then you can make offers to them later, even if they don't allow you to make any offer on the webinar. So I do both. I do an offer at the end, but if the audience is large enough, then then I'll bypass that.
So let's talk about what happened a couple of days ago with SCORE Associates. SCORE and Associates, or SCORE Associates?
SCORE Association.
SCORE Association.
Yeah.
Got it. So this wasn't anything that happened overnight. In fact, it took well over a year and a half, right?
Yeah. So I was introduced. I mean, often it comes from an introduction. So Justin Crane, a friend of ours who we've worked with through Rise 25 and who's done a number of webinars, also had a connection to them. And one of the best things you can do, and by the way, is immerse yourself. You want to do webinars, immerse yourself with other people who are doing webinars for different audiences, get to know them, become friends with them, and recommend each other back and forth to different organizations or individuals. That's the best thing you can do. So Justin had, I've introduced him to other people. He introduced me to these people. The guy ended up leaving who I was emailing with. I was emailing with him for like months and months. And then I emailed him after he left, didn't know that he'd left. And then months after that, I got an email back from the person who'd replaced him saying, I got forwarded this email saying you want to do a webinar for us. So it took a year and a half. I finally get on the phone with her, finally get the date nailed down. And, it was, we can talk about some of the, parameters. They didn't want to pitch at the end. They wanted it to be unique. Usually I try and use the same title over and over again, because once you find a title that's resonating really well, you want to use that title again and again and again. You don't want to reinvent the wheel every time, because you might create a title that's not going to do as well. And that's going to influence how many people are going to register. It's going to influence how many people are going to join your list. So, they wanted a different title, which ended up being a really good title, because we ended up getting 4,500 people registered, which was their second largest number of people registered for a webinar ever. And the largest was during Small Business Week, and they promoted the heck out of it. And this one, the one that I did this week, was in the doldrums of summer. We're in the middle of August here. Kids are still out of school. There's a lot of people are not back at work yet. They're on vacation. So it was really awesome to see that people resonated with it. So those are some of the unique requirements about it. No pitch at the end. Oh, and then the other thing is that, some companies will just directly give you the list afterwards if they host it with their software. Others will let you collect the email addresses in different ways. And I had this happen a number of times. And there are ways that you can usually kind of get around it. So for example, sometimes they won't allow you to collect email addresses at all. So what I'll do is I'll say, okay, that's fine. Again, if the audience is large enough, I'll say, okay, that's fine. So what I could do is I could create a workbook, a free workbook that people can download, and they can follow along during the presentation, and they can take notes directly in the workbook. Is it okay if I do that? And they'll be like, oh yeah, absolutely. That sounds great. Is it okay if I put it on an opt-in page so they have to opt in to get it, but they can unsubscribe at any time? And 99%, 100% of the time, they're like, yeah, that's totally fine. Sometimes they'll even email out to their list. So they'll email their list to tell them about the webinar, and they'll send another email saying, by the way, opt in for this workbook. Like you won't give you the emails directly, but they'll let you opt in for the workbook. And so that's another way that you can get people. And then during the webinar, at the beginning of the webinar, one of my first slides is make sure you download this workbook right now. Mm-hmm. And then, sorry, I'm talking a lot here.
That's okay. I've got some questions I'm going to line up in a second, but go ahead.
Okay. So also another thing I do is I tease later. I say, for those of you who stick around to the end, I'm going to have a special bonus for you. And then at the end, I have some special bonus that's something that they're going to really want. And I say, now, anyone who opted in already, or if you just go and I give the same link for the workbook and I say, just opt in for this workbook and I will send it to you later today or something like that. And then I just email it to them later after they've opted in. And I got probably about 300 or 400 additional emails through this webinar, the SCORE webinar, just through using that strategy. So by the way, their policy was they would share the email list, but only for the people who opted to receive information from me. So they had one of the questions when they registered was, do you want to hear from the presenter, John Corcoran? And some people said yes, some people said no. Net about 3,000 out of the 4,500, I received permission to communicate with them by email.
Amazing. So one of the things that I kind of picked up on as you were telling this story is us in the webinar industry, like we're in the online marketing industry. When I talk to other marketers, there's a certain expectation when you're doing these joint venture webinars, and most of them will probably allow you to pitch, other people won't. But when you go outside of this internet marketing community and you go to these, whether it's big corporations or associations, they're not entirely used to what we do as internet marketers or online marketers. And so what I'm gathering is that the protocol is a little bit different. So sending them to an opt-in page, they don't really care, right? Oh, I got a workbook for them. Do you mind if they opt in? It's like, so you just have to take a little bit of a different angle of approach. Is that true for the most?
I think that's fair. Yeah, I think that's fair. You just have to be very sensitive to that because different organizations, associations are very sensitive to. They don't want their people to be pitched, which is fine. That's fine. There have been very rare instances where I haven't been able to find some way that I can communicate with them because most companies, most organizations, they understand that you need to get something out of it or they're not going to get quality people presenting to them. Mm-hmm. If they're paying you to do a webinar, it's a different matter. But if they're not paying you to do a webinar and you're just doing it to gain exposure, brand recognition, or, to grow your audience, usually they'll allow something at the end, whether it's like telling about what you do or, just flashing up your website or how they can communicate. The worst possible one would be like putting up your Twitter handle or like telling them to email you directly. That would be the worst possible one. And, even if it was a large audience and that was all you could do, I would probably pass if there was no possible way to have some ability to communicate with people because that is critical. That's absolutely critical, the ability to follow up and communicate with them. And frankly, I think it's a misunderstanding on the part of a lot of companies and associations that oftentimes their people want to hear from the presenter. They registered for the webinar. They're obviously interested in the topic. And so, and they can unsubscribe at any time.
Mm-hmm.
So they want to hear from you. So yeah, I think you just need to be sensitive to what their particular needs are.
100%. I think it's a great point. And it's all about knowing your audience, right? And so when you do these partnered webinars, I mean, it wouldn't make much sense if you did it for free and you couldn't share your information. I think most other businesses are realistic and appreciative of that. Putting an opt-in page for an email address isn't that big of a deal. And, there has to be some mutual benefit for you, sacrificing
Right.
your time and sharing the information, which is valuable to their audience.
Yeah.
So,
One more point before we get to that. I had one company that I did a webinar for, and it actually ended up being a pretty large audience, but they told me beforehand that they would share the list with me. Afterwards, I don't know what happened with the guy that was within the company organizing it, but he just nearly completely flaked. Like I had to follow up with him multiple times, and I'd promised on the webinar that I would send something out to people because you want them to expect to hear from you. And if it's another company that is hosting it and they handle the webinar software and all the notifications are coming from them, not from you, then you want the first communication from you to be a give. You want it to be giving them something, some additional bonus, and you want them to be expecting it. So what I'll do is on the webinar, I will say I'm going to give something away. And that's also partially for the company too, because then you can follow up them and you can say, you promised me the email list, and I promised on the webinar that I was going to give away this thing, and so I need to do that. And most of the time, they will understand, and they won't be like, "Well, I can just send it to you." We can send it directly to them. It's like if they promise the list, they should give it to you. But I've had instances where they promise the list and then they flake for whatever reason. I ended up finally getting it from this particular company. But because of that experience, that's why I also do the workbook strategy, because you don't want to lose it entirely, And this particular webinar this week that we're talking about for Score Association, I had about 650 people that opted in for that workbook. So that's a substantial number just for the workbook. So it's worth the additional work that you have to put in to set that up.
Perfect. So let's talk about that. The first thing that I want to talk about with your largest webinar ever, and you mentioned this earlier, you said you have to have a good title. You have to really keep developing the title. What was the title that you guys came up with?
It was Add New Revenue Streams to Your Service-Based Business. The one I've been using has been 10 clients in 30 days, how to add new clients quickly or something like that. And that one's been doing really well, and I continue to use it. What my process is, I'll develop a new webinar, and I will share it internally. I'll share it on LinkedIn. I'll send it to my own list, and I'll kind of do the same webinar or similar versions of it as I'm improving it, but with different titles over a period of a number of weeks, and testing different titles and then keeping track of how many people register to see what's the best webinar. So I do that before I go and do this webinar externally to anyone else. Highly recommend doing that. So that was the title that we used in it. They must have known their audience.
Is this for ultimately Rise 25? Does this help lead people into the awareness of Rise 25?
Yes, it does.
Awesome. So what are some other examples of good webinar headlines that gets people excited?
Great question. So, and I am, so in favor of continuing to test your titles, because everything flows downhill from the title. The title will influence how many people register for the webinar. The title will influence how many people then show up to the webinar live. The title will influence how many people buy whatever it is you're selling. The title will influence, it just completely flows downhill from there. So a lot of times people have got a title that they just haven't thought through. They haven't tested it. And everything else will get better results if they just get a better title in place. And so I find numbers do well. Specific, not round numbers, but individual, well, sometimes round numbers, but, odd numbers, like how I made $7,438 in 60 minutes and you can too in the next 7 days. Like time parameters works well. That sounds a little cheesy, that one, but
have you ever done? So I want to actually focus on a headline like that. The reason why I'm interrupting you is so for me, I'm interested in going to different audiences, and so if I were to give an internal objection that I've got is giving a webinar on webinars. Right, our team is building a new webinar for my webinar course as we speak, but I've just got this internal fear that if I go and I approach an association and say, "Hey, can I do a presentation to your audience about how to make money with webinars?" right? And I say how I made, $14,549 in 24 hours with one simple webinar. Like that sounds
Yeah.
too internet marketing to me.
It does. It does. Yeah. I mean, it really depends on the audience that you're going to. And if you're going to a company or an association, they're probably going to balk at a title like that. So you want to be really sensitive to that. But it really depends on, as you said, knowing the audience. So maybe they're really interested in getting more clients, or maybe they're really interested in growing their revenues, or maybe they're really interested in diversifying their revenues, or maybe they're really interested in scaling their business or something like that. I mean, there's a lot of benefits to webinars. Or maybe they're interested in increasing their lead flow, So you find what it is what you think will work for them. The other title that I used, 10 clients in 30 days, wasn't what I thought would do the best, but it has proven to be what's done the best. And even with, partners at other companies, when I was starting to do this one externally, I said, would you like this one or this other one? I had another one. It was like how to add 3 new revenue streams to your business in 30 days or something. And they all like the 10 clients in 30 days. It's very specific. It's very time limited. And so I find that's what works really well.
Let's talk about your timeline of a partner webinar, one of these webinars that you're doing. So I've got my own very specific formula that I use for direct selling or lead gen webinars, right? What works best for you that you've found with these types of partner webinars when you're going to somebody else's list?
Do you mean timeline in the follow-up communication or timeline like
of the actual presentation? So like usually there's an introduction, then there's the content, and maybe like closing remarks. Like what would be the typical timeline for that?
Okay. Well, it depends on how long they want it to be. I mean, I find, certainly in the internet marketing world, it tends to be around 60 minutes or so. People want 50, 60 minutes. And I know some people that are doing like these masterclass style that are 3 hours long. And at the 60 minutes and 120 minutes in, they do a pitch for their program or a pitch to book a strategy call or something like that. That's pretty unusual. There's a company that does research on webinar best practices, and they've reported that around 56 minutes, I believe, maybe you've seen some different numbers, 56 minutes is on average the attendance rate. You also want to be really clear. I made this mistake in the past. You want to be really clear on how much time it's going to be. If you say 60 minutes, you should probably end it around 60 minutes, because even if you want to like go longer answering questions, some people will be pissed that they had to leave because they had an appointment scheduled and they missed out on the rest of that. So if it's going to be 90 minutes, say 90 minutes. So just be really clear on how long it's going to be. The one for Score Association, they wanted 40 minutes of presentation. So lately, I've actually been doing less. I've been doing more like 40 minutes. And with some of the evergreen webinars that I have, those I'm doing less too, because I'm finding that like more around 40 minutes is doing better as well, rather than like a full hour. So as far as like how much content, I probably do the first 6 to 8 minutes is kind of introductory. And during that time, you're establishing who you are, you're establishing your bona fides, you're establishing social proof that they should listen to you, why they should listen to you, because if you don't say that, they're going to be gone. You should establish exactly what they're going to get out of this. I say it in multiple different ways. Like, here's what you can expect. This will be valuable to you if, and I kind of say it in a couple of different ways. I'll say this will be valuable for you if you are this kind of person, and I'll explain exactly the kind of person, because the last thing you want is people to stick around if it's not a good fit for them. You want them to hop off if it's not the right fit for them. So that you want to be very, very specific about what they're going to get out of that webinar, and then you want to deliver on it. So that's the first 6 to 8 minutes. Then you get into the meat of the presentation. I'm not a big believer in faking. Here's a big fake out. Here's the big secret. I'm going to tell you a big secret. It's going to come at the end. The big secret at the end is you got to pay me money to find out the answer to the secret. I mean, that kind of crap is it'll just burn your reputation really quickly. So I think you actually need to prove that you know what you're talking about. You actually need to teach people something, or they're going to be just really, really angry at you. And I find using facts and figures and numbers and data at some point in your presentation, during the meat of the presentation, between 6 to 8 minutes in, 30 minutes or 40 minutes in that point, giving them some real knowledge about what it is you're teaching on that they probably don't know about. It's funny because I've done presentations where I don't give data or numbers or statistics, And inevitably, I just get like some more negative feedback. So I
Yeah.
always kind of give something, you know?
We're a huge advocate for it. I mean, we put it in every one of our presentations. That's what our copywriters do. It's their primary responsibility is go find facts that validate your claims. So Todd Brown was one of the guys who used this great analogy, and he's like, when you give a presentation or when you're doing any sort of online marketing funnel, you're trying to convince somebody of your product or service, you're trying to persuade them to sell, you have to think of it like you're a prosecutor presenting your evidence to a jury and you're presenting a case, right? And nobody's going to believe you if you just stand up and say, my
opinion is this.
Yeah. So like, this guy is guilty, like, but you don't have any proof, right?
Yeah.
So it's like, if you're a prosecutor,
believe me.
Yeah, believe me, this guy's guilty. It's like, no.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
I mean, you have to have that substantial proof to validate your claims. Otherwise, people are just going to call BS on you.
Exactly. Right. And then, after probably about 30 minutes or so, and this varies sometimes, but I'm trying to get, by that point, getting into the case studies. So you've taught people, and you don't want to be too pie in the sky. Like, people want things practical. They want to hear stories. And by the way, I've told stories by this point. I've already told a story or two at the beginning about myself or about someone else that makes it more relatable. But then later you get into the case studies. And just recently, I wasn't happy with my case studies. I felt like they weren't educational enough. The case studies are social proof. They're selling what you're selling. And they should be case studies of people that you've worked with. If you don't have them yet, then they can be case studies of others who have gotten results using the methods that you advocate. But eventually they should be case studies of people you've worked with, and they should be educational. So they can't just be like, look, here's Sarah. She's got this big check for $4,000. I helped her get it. Okay, now here's George, case study George. He got this big check for $7,000. It's just like, okay, people are going to just be turned off for that. But actually like breaking it down and making it like, what did they do that they got this result? What were the steps that they took? And by the way, I helped them get there. Then that's both educating the people who are observing the webinar, and it's also edifying you, and it's moving people more towards deciding if they want to work with you, because it's establishing that you know what you're talking about. So the case studies then are probably about 30 to 40 minutes, and then you're getting into your transitioning into, you don't want people feeling like they've gotten everything, because if they feel like they've gotten everything or they're confused, then they won't make any decision to work with you. So what I do is, after that, I want them to understand that this is a piece of the puzzle, but we can't possibly cover everything in 40 minutes. There's a lot more. So oftentimes I'll transition to, look, guys, we're running out of time, but I want to tell you briefly about these other things that you need to really know, okay? And then I'll often have like a slide that has just bullets, like different things, and I'll mention them briefly. Like, you need to know this, you need to learn this, you need this, you really need to focus on this and this thing. And I'll go through them, and it leaves them with, oh, wow, I learned a lot about this one narrow topic, but really there's this other universe that I need to know this stuff also. And then, of course, that transitions into, okay, well, if you'd like a faster process for achieving those results, then I'd like to tell you a little bit about what I'm offering. And it's like a natural progression. And I'm sure you've seen this, Joel. A lot of people really struggle with that point right there. That's a big question people have. How do I transition from education, teaching, to selling? And I've found that's the most natural transition, is just saying like, okay, I've hopefully gotten you guys a lot here. We've covered a lot, but there's a lot more to cover. And if you would like to do it a lot faster than it took me, then here's a solution that can help you to get there.
But on a lead gen style webinar, like, how do you end it? How do you end?
Good question.
Yeah.
Good question. So what I did 2 days ago was I basically said at the end of the webinar, instead of going into like a pitch, I basically said, okay, so you're probably wondering right now a couple of different things. Will this work for me? And what's next? What should I do now? And I said, this is absolutely what you should do now. And in my case, I was talking about how do people go from one-to-one to one-to-many in terms of their offering and their revenue style for their business. And so I said, the first thing you need to do is you need to reach out via email to your current and past clients. You need to get them on the phone. You need to ask them about how you can help them and serve them, and gather that data, and then that'll help you to design something that's one-to-many that you can offer to your existing clients or past clients or prospects. So you're probably wondering, well, how do I do that? Well, I've created I call it the ultimate feedback email template and phone script that will show you exactly the email to send and show you exactly the phone script that you want to use to get these people on the phone. If you'd like to have that, everyone who opted in for the workbook at the beginning, I'm going to send it to you after this presentation. And if you didn't, here's the URL again, opt in and I will send you that. So it naturally led into this
So
one
you
last.
give them another small piece. You don't give them the rest. You just give them another small piece for lead gen.
Exactly.
Raise their hand. And those people who take that up, they're substantially more interested than someone who doesn't, which is awesome. Cool.
Exactly. Yeah. And we weren't quite prepared. It was double the size audience I've ever experienced before. So the last 48 hours have been people messaging us, tons of emails, like asking for this email template. You have something that's good when you have a lot of people that are just like emailing, like they don't even wait for the email. They're like, you mentioned this email template. Can I get it now? So you definitely want it. You want to make sure it's something that people actually want.
Awesome. What I was really concerned with is just making sure it's not salesy in a way when you have agreed with your partner that you weren't going to pitch, right? And so that was my biggest question as you were talking about that, because you really don't want to burn that bridge with a partner, especially of that size, because I'm sure that presentation that you did for them, I'm sure that's going to lead to they're going to introduce you to somebody else who might want you to do that presentation. So you just don't want to burn that bridge.
Or you want to do another presentation down the line. Yeah. 6 months later. I mean, you establish these relationships, and every 6 months or once a year, you can go back to them and say, hey, I've got a new presentation. Can I do it again? And that's wonderful. As a number partner, I've done Tony Robbins' company a couple of times. I've done AWeber a couple of times. I've done Contactually a couple of times. And that's wonderful. It's great to be able to go back to those things. So yeah, you absolutely don't want to burn that relationship. So even that last piece, giving away the email template at the end, even though I don't think that they're going to have a problem with that, I double checked with them. I said, is it okay if I give this away at the end? It's on an opt-in page, but they can unsubscribe at any time. And they said, yeah, that's totally fine.
Unbelievable, man. Love it.
Yeah.
This is a great strategy. It's one that I need to be implementing more often. Most of the times when I do these podcasts and I see these people doing really, really big things like you, John, and adding thousands of people onto your list immediately, like, why am I not doing that? Right? It's just kind of like a kick in the face. It's like, come on, Joel, you're the webinar guy. You should be doing lead gen webinars, but it's like, you can only do so much.
There's only so much you can do, and it does take a lot of effort in relationship building. And that's a whole nother conversation is, how do you make that happen? Because it's really immersing yourself in building relationships with the people that have got these, these audiences. But you can also just do cold outreach too. I mean, we've done this. We've just gone and done a ton of research into the companies out there that are doing educational webinars. And here's what you want to look for. You want to look for companies that are doing on kind of a regular basis webinars for their audience. They're free webinars and they have external presenters come in. And maybe you also even watch the webinar and you make sure that they are promoting themselves in some way. Usually they can, not like zero promotion, but some kind of promotion themselves. And, a lot of times it might be an association or it might be a software company. And they might bring in a bunch of outside speakers, thought leaders, authors, stuff like that. And not all of them are savvy enough to collect email addresses. And so that's a huge opportunity for you too. Because I've seen some associations where they have a parade of external speakers coming in and doing webinar presentations. And they're doing it for branding, whatever that means, or they're doing it for, I don't know, so people would email them directly, or they would pick up the phone and call them, for consulting or coaching or something like that. Personally, those things are great and all, but I want the most number of people being added to my email list so that I can, and this is a whole nother piece, by the way, your audience, I'm sure, is sophisticated. I'm sure your audience is sophisticated enough to know this, but it bears repeating. You should have a follow-up sequence in place, period, for everything. And so that they will continue to hear from you. Because if you put in all this effort and you go and present and you get a big audience and they're added to your email list and you don't communicate with them, it'll lead to nothing. So you need to have a sequence of emails that are going to go out afterwards, which will then nurture a relationship with them. And that's just phenomenal because they've heard you on the webinar, or even if they haven't heard you on their webinar, but they've been added to your email list. And then they get those regular emails from you and they see that you deliver value and they get to know you and your style. And I've had people years later who found me on a webinar and years later they're ready to buy. They're ready. Like now I'm ready. I've been reading your stuff for years. And so that's really critical too. And the great thing is that that's set it and forget it. You set up those emails, those educational emails, you build them out over a period of a number of months, and a lot of them continue to go out with regularity. So
that's awesome. Well, John, we've shared a lot on this brief interview, on this brief podcast. But in summary, essentially what you have just shared with us is the strategy you've used to build and nurture a very large database of interested buyers for your businesses. And so what you've been doing is you've been reaching out to interested parties and asking if they can partner with you to share content. In exchange, you get their name and their email address. If you can pitch, even better. If not, no big deal. You put them into an autoresponder, put them into a follow-up sequence where you can nurture them and hopefully sell them some stuff, or maybe not even sell them some stuff down the road, whatever. But now it becomes this automated system where people know, like, and trust you, and it builds your brand and it builds your credibility.
Yeah, and when you put it that way, man, that sounds like a lot of work. We covered a lot. I mean, and don't get me wrong, there is a lot of work, but the difference between what those who are listening to this are probably doing now and what we've described is a lot of what we described. You put it into place once, you set it and you forget it. So, for example, a webinar, you create a good one and then you do it over and over again. You're like a keynote speaker who doesn't create a new keynote speech every time. They just go and present it to different audiences over and over and over again, except you don't need to be wearing pants and you can be in your spare bedroom. So it's really cool. So, I'd say, like, don't be intimidated by the amount of work that it requires on the front end. It's work, it's pieces that you put in place, and then you benefit from them for years and years to come. So it's truly the best way to buy back more of your time so you can spend more time doing what you love with your family members and with your friends and hobbies and all that kind of stuff. So I'm a huge advocate of webinars, and I say, go for it and don't be intimidated by the stuff that you need to do just to get up to speed with it.
Awesome. Well, John, where can people find you to learn more information and just connect with you?
Great. Yeah. Thank you. And this was a pleasure. So, Rise 25 is my business with Dr. Jeremy Weisz, and you can learn about us there. You can go to Rise 25. You can also grab we give away it's called our Dream Product Ladder. It's a tool for discovering the untapped revenue that you have existing in your business right now. You can also connect with me at smartbusinessrevolution.com, which is my blog and podcast. And feel free to reach out if you have any questions about webinars. But Joel is the man when it comes to webinars. So I'm sure they got plenty of resources there. So it's my pleasure, Joel.
John, I had a blast today. I'm glad you hopped on, and it gives me the kick in the butt because I need to be doing more of these partner strategies and these types of promotions. But I know my audience is going to love what we talked about today. So please go check out John's stuff with the links that he just gave you. We'll include them down in the show notes as well. But John, thanks so much for hopping on board, and it was a pleasure.
Yep, thank you.
Thanks so much for listening. We hope you enjoyed today's episode, and we look forward to giving you the next one. You can also follow and watch the behind-the-scenes look at how I'm personally launching a brand new 6- and 7-figure product from scratch at soldwithwebinars.com/TV. And if you'd like to come hang out with other fellow experts, join our Facebook group at soldwithwebinars.com/experts. Join us next time, and I'll see you there.